Greetings. This is I Am Vermont Too, and my name is Sha'an Moliere. I Am Vermont Too is modeled after the I Too Am Vermont Harvard Initiative. The I Am Vermont Too photo story project shines a light on the diversity of identities and experiences of people of color all across the state of Vermont. The I Am Vermont Too project is a medium for people of color to tell our stories and to convey how racism has a significant impact in our lives. This is the first known statewide multi-generation project done only by people of color living, working, and attending school in the state. It is also a vehicle to outreach for the People of Color Caucus. Social justice activist Grace Lee Boggs said, "Creativity is the key to human liberation." A poem. Fannie Lou Hamer by Camilla Aisha. Quote, "I am sick and tired of being sick and tired." Unquote. She sat across the desk from me, squirming. It was stifling. My suite runs hot, but most days it's bearable. This student has turned in nothing, rarely comes to class. When she does, her eyes bore into me with a disdain born long before either of us. She doesn't trust anything I say. She can't respect my station. The words coming out of these lips, this face, my breathing, it is an affront. It's me, she says. I never was this student's professor, her immediate reaction seeing me at the smartboard. But I have a calling to complete, and she has to finish college, return to a town where she doesn't have to look at or listen to or respect anyone like me, forever tall, large, and brown in her dagger eyes. Though it's clear she looks down on me, she can return, if not to her hometown, another enclave, so many others, where she can brush a dog's golden coat, be a vegan, and call herself a good person. Are you having difficulty with your other classes? No. Go, I say tenderly. Loaded as a cop's gun, she blurts point blank that she's afraid of me. Twice. My soft syllables rattle something planted deep, so I tell her to go where she'd feel more comfortable, as if she were my niece or godchild, even wish her a good day. If she stays, the ways this could backfire. Where's my Kevlar shield from her shame? There is no way to tell when these breasts will evoke solace or terror. I hate that she surprises me, that I lull myself to think her ilk is gone, despite knowing so much more and better. I can't prophesize my worth all semester, exhaust us for the greater good. I can't make her make me a monster to myself. I'm running out of time and pity the extent of her impoverished heart. She's from New England. I'm from the Mid-South. Far from elderly. Someone just raised her like this, with love. I have essays to grade, but words warp on the white page. Dark, just out of reach. I blink 2 hours away. Find it hard to lift my legs, my voice, my head precious to my parents. now being held in my own hands. How did they survive so much worse than millions with all their scars? What would these rivers be without their weeping, these streets without their faith and sweat? Fannie Lou Hamer thundered what they felt, we feel, into DNC microphones on black and white TV years before I was a notion. She doesn't know who Fannie Lou Hamer is and never has to. My guest today is Margie Woods. I first met Margie when I was in AmeriCorps as the Youth Outreach Literacy Coordinator for the Athenaeum. Margie was working as a teacher at Head Start. I was so surprised to see her, actually shocked was more accurate. We stood and looked at each other and hugged. Last year, Margie was one of the coordinators for the I Am Vermont Too photo exhibit at Lyndon State College, as well as one of the subjects. As a result of the exhibit, she assisted in developing LSC Soul, Lyndon Students of Color Support, Organize, Uplift, and Love. Welcome to the program, Margie, and thank you for being here and for suggesting the poem for today's program. Before you tell our viewers about yourself, can you share what it was like to be involved with the I Am Vermont Too photo project?
Well, thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here with you. Being part of the exhibit was a very powerful experience. It was emotional. So many times in my time in Vermont, I've experienced microaggressions and suppressed them and bottled them. And the I Am Vermont Too exhibit gave me permission and a platform to speak those things, speak about those feelings I had, and really open up and say, I was affected by this, and to be in a community of people who all had similar experiences and all supported me in processing those moments. So it was very moving, and I'm better for being part of that.
And as I had mentioned in your introduction, that you were part of a small team that helped to develop LSC Soul. Do you want to talk a little bit about that and motivation, need?
Sure. As I mentioned, we brought all these people together who were sharing these experiences, and you and I and our friend Janelle got together on campus, and we talked to students and stopped people and asked them questions about their experiences as students of color on a predominantly white campus. And in doing that, we sat and we said, we're asking people to really go to an emotional place and really talk about things that are hurtful, and what do we want to do as a result? We don't want to simply put up their photo and walk away and have no sustainable project or any support that they could turn to. And so that's when we came up with the Soul Group, and offered that platform for people to get together on an ongoing basis to provide that continued support and really give space for us to say, these are experiences that we're having. It's uncomfortable, and we can talk about action that can be taken to remedy some of these things. So.
Excellent. And also in the environment around food. So that was one of the other wonderful benefits that came as a result. So can you give us a little background? Tell us something about yourself. How do you identify, etc.?
I identify as a Black woman. I'm one of 7 children, and I was raised in Southern Virginia in a town called Danville. My mother was an educator, my grandmother was an educator, so naturally I became an educator. I've been in education for almost a decade now, and currently I'm a grad student at Northern Vermont University, formerly known as Lyndon State College. I started in early childhood education, and I was a Head Start teacher for several years when we first moved to Vermont. Now I'm transitioning towards secondary education. I'm hoping to work in the 6th to 12th grade range in English and language arts. Yeah.
So how long have you been in Vermont? Your family been to Vermont? If you're not from Vermont, where are you from? Why did you move here, or why did your family move here?
We moved to Vermont in 2013, June of 2013, so I've been here for 5 years. We moved to Vermont because, my husband and I moved to Vermont because he grew up here, and we would come and visit each year, and it had the appearance of being a really progressive state, a lot of art. I was really drawn to the emphasis on local entrepreneurship and supporting local artists, local goods, and that really pulled me in. I like the idea that, you know, your neighbor could be the person who provides your milk, your neighbor could be the person who makes your maple syrup, and being able to have that close-knit feeling. And since moving here, I'm still trying to find that sense of connection. In 5 years, I don't feel like I've quite made that yet. So.
That reminds me of the reason I moved here 35 years ago, coming from New York City. I had never experienced a sense of community the way I first did here. My first winter was my first year of driving, and I got to know a lot of my neighbors because I went off the road a lot, and in a sense it was that people had your back, that they wanted to know who you were and how they could help you, and that was quite opposite from where I grew up. Where did you grow up, and was there racial diversity?
I grew up in Danville, Virginia. It was a very diverse area, a large population that still had a small town feel. It was a factory community. A lot of people worked in a factory and lived in the area. But it still was segregated in a lot of ways. You knew where, as a black person, you knew where to go, where you would be welcome and not welcome. Schools were a little segregated, meaning I think more along the lines of economics and social class. And I was born and raised there, and the town, Danville, Virginia, is known historically as the last capital of the Confederacy. So that history was there, a very celebratory spirit regarding the Confederacy. So I was no stranger to racism and sort of de facto segregation, and that was still very much alive in that community. So moving to Vermont seemed like a way to escape that.
And I like that you use the word escape, in that it's very blatant in the South. Growing up in the North, that's what we would think. We grew up using the South as examples of what racism is like, and yet I grew up in the borough of Queens, and you knew that there were some neighborhoods not only didn't you go to, you weren't invited to move into. That was a way to keep you out of the schools. There was districting so that they could separate people of color from the white population. And so thank you for bringing up the idea and notion that it's not for me only the South, but that it's in the North too. And Northerners need to take a look at that as well. So a little bit more about you. I know that you teach, but some more passions, your interests, you know, what excites you?
Sure. My passion is literature and writing. I'm passionate about education. I have a daughter who's 3, so we're working on some preschool things with her, and my early childhood background is coming out there, and I get to do some fun things and passion projects with her. Besides that, read a lot. I'm dabbling in writing. It's something I want to explore. And I think that's about it. I love gardening. That's a new passion since moving to Vermont. I've been able to go a bit further with that. So, yeah.
Yeah, I didn't know I was a gardener either, although I had house plants, which are quite different. There's a whole different skill set in gardening outside, and it does bring joy, delight, and nourishment to your family. Yeah. Yeah. So what is it like for you and your family living here?
It started off pretty well, and that was before my daughter was born. I had a new job. I was a preschool teacher for Head Start. My husband was able to return to a field that he was passionate about. He works in human services, and as a Linden State alumni, he got to reconnect with a lot of the people who nurtured him through that journey. So we were very optimistic coming in. Since having my daughter, it's been a whirlwind of trying to find out what it takes to grow up in this state. What tools does she need to survive her childhood in this state? And I think that's the difference. It's one thing to move here as an adult and be able to find your own support system and build your own community. But now I'm trying to build something for her so that she can feel nurtured and develop in a healthy way. And that's been really difficult for us.
Sounds a bit challenging.
It is.
Yeah. So that brings me to how has the impact of racism been for you living in Vermont? How has it impacted you?
It feels like my bubble is getting smaller. I came, open-hearted and looking for new friendships, new connections, and as I've been making those connections with the different incidents of racism and microaggressions, it feels like that circle is getting smaller and smaller. There have been instances where I would not expect certain things to come from certain people, certain things to be said by certain people, and it really restricts where I feel free and where I feel welcome. Even in my studies as a graduate student, it's affected how I interact with instructors and classmates. As a teacher, it's affected how I teach and how I interact with my students. I feel like I have to be very careful because parents are either uncomfortable with my role in the classroom, students don't know how to perceive me. As far as getting support from employers, I feel like that has been lacking in some ways. So that bubble just keeps shrinking and getting smaller.
So you use the word microaggressions, and we're going to go into that. But can you, before we do, give a brief description of how you would describe microaggressions?
I describe microaggressions as incidents, statements that are said with not necessarily with the intention of causing harm or undermining my personhood or calling into question my integrity or my ability, but it does. It's based on assumption, it's based on bias, and in a lot of ways there's no consideration of my feelings or my humanity. It's an opportunity for someone to simply say immediately what comes to mind and not really be held accountable for the impact of that statement.
Can you give us a particular situation and describe it as briefly as you can where you had experienced a microaggression?
Sure. When I was a preschool teacher, I had a provider who was coming into my room to observe a student. I knew they were coming. I'd met them at a meeting, And they came to my classroom door and peeked in, and I recognized them, so I looked out and I said, "Would you like to come in?" They said, "Oh, no, I'll wait." And so they stood out in the hallway and they waited. And I'm leading the class through our regular routine, and as we go to transition to another part of our day, the person stops me in the hall and says, "Can you tell me what time the lead teacher comes in?" And I said, "I am the lead teacher." Oh, and like this look of complete surprise, even though I'd met this person, and I don't know, I go through a lot of mental Olympics trying to analyze what were they thinking, what could have led them to that conclusion, but that one sticks out.
So with that moment, how did you feel?
I felt as if I was a perpetrator almost. I was in a role that I should not have had. It's unexpected for someone who looks like me to have this type of position, and I really felt discounted and just not even considered as a professional. So.
What did you need?
In that moment, it would have helped if I'd had someone who understood the impact of something like that, that I could have gone to after that moment and talked about, and maybe there could have been a conversation or something, I don't know. But I feel like in a lot of situations that I've had in the education field, that support from either supervisors or administration as a person who would understand that experience and the impact of that, I don't feel like I have had that in the situations.
Oh, that leads to the next question of what barriers, or if any, do you think you have put up because of microaggressions?
I think I've been very guarded in terms of interacting with colleagues and with my students, because I've retained this idea of myself as a perpetrator, someone who's in a position I should not have or I wouldn't necessarily have, and there's a lot of tiptoeing I do as a result of that, because I don't want to put my career at risk, or it's a lot of fear. There's a lot of fear around how I might be perceived, or I don't know. That's the word that comes to mind, fear.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm also sensing some stress that is added to your job that wouldn't necessarily be there if that situation hadn't occurred.
Yeah.
So what do you think the community could do to one where your life, where you could be more visible, where your experiences are validated and your contributions to the community are valued? So if you were to give a message to the community, what would it be?
I think as a community we should start asking questions about representation in schools. I don't see many educators in the Northeast Kingdom who identify as people of color. I think we're significantly underrepresented, and I'm curious as to why. I don't know if it's an issue of recruitment. I don't know if the support is in place for when these individuals are hired and put in the classroom, but that would alleviate a lot of the stress for me, as if I felt there was more representation of people who shared my perspective and shared similar experiences, who occupied those spaces. And I think our students would benefit from it. I've experienced microaggressions from students, and I look at it differently because they are children, but I also think about how they're also deprived because they aren't hearing from people who share this perspective.
That's a profound statement, and it leads me to bring up something that Howard Stevenson talks about in his book, Promoting Racial Literacy in Our Schools, Differences Making Differences. And he talks about the racial hierarchy and, hierarchy socialization and the roles we all play for the status quo. And he says, quote, perhaps becoming racially literate means learning to refuse acting out racial roles that demand giving up some humanity for the sake of an equal and just education, unquote. That's something that I think is crucial as we move forward and as a community, what we want to bring to our children and have as our legacy. So I would like to thank you once again for being part of our program, for providing the poem, and as well as you viewers, and visitors for watching. Please check out I Am Vermont Too on Facebook. Thank you.